Okay, I think we're about to get started. Leah, if you could start the recording. It looks like she started it, which is great. So we do have a full day here together. We have 90 minutes today, and I'm Cheryl Dowd. I'm the Senior Director for the State Authorization Network and WCET Policy Innovations. So on behalf of the SAN team, including Catherine Kerensky, Amanda Owen, Leah Wade, and Cassie Shun, who is our contractor, and myself, welcome to day one of this exclusive SAN member only summer compliance series. Today is going to be session one, connecting compliance and aid insights from ahead and campus collaboration. So when we say ahead, we're referring to the ahead rulemaking committee. And we'll talk about what that means in just a few minutes. But I want to share with you that we're very pleased to have you. This is 3 days of compliance related concerns that institutions need to have an awareness as they are working with their institutions. You will note the ocean theme, and that was on purpose. I was really glad one of our presenters noticed that. I will completely credit Catherine Kerensky for finding our template because is our intention to create calm as we are learning a lot of nuance to help support our students at our institution. So today I am joined by wonderful colleagues to share an overview of new regulations directed by statute from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was enacted last July, for which the U.S. Department of Education then held rulemaking in late 2025 and early 2026 to develop regulations to implement rules addressing Pell and workforce Pell, and also new accountability measures. Can we go to the next slide, please? Great. So I'm your moderator, but we have several wonderful presenters today. And the list here is by order of appearance. So we have Julie Woodruff, who's an attorney with Thompson Coburn. We have Lynette Kuhn, the Deputy Secretary and Commissioner for Post-Secondary and Higher Education with the Pennsylvania Department of Education. We have Cynthia Proctor, Director of Communications and Academic Policy Development for the Office of the Provost at the State University of New York, SUNY. And then Carolyn Fast, Director of Higher Education Policy and Senior Fellow at the Century Foundation. We're really pleased to have these four with us today because we're going to be able to address what has come through in terms of the rulemaking. And thank you for moving it forward. And so we are doing this as though it were two mini webinars, kind of like they broke up the AHEAD committee for rulemaking. So we'll have part one is addressing the Pell and workforce Pell, and we will take questions at the end of that, and then we will have part two, which will be the accountability measures overview with its impact. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. We will address those questions, but if you would like to use the chat to communicate with others while we're doing the webinar, please feel free. That is often a really interesting set of conversations that occur within the chat. We don't want to limit that. So you can go on to the next slide, please. Great. So we're just going to do a little bit of an introduction about, what is this rulemaking I'm speaking of? Can you go to the next slide? Great. Okay, so federal regulations are developed to implement federal statutes that are developed by Congress. So statutes will either expressly or implicitly direct administrative agencies to create regulations to implement the statutes. Excuse me. So the agencies must follow federal statute called the Administrative Procedure Act as a process to develop the rules that will be part of the rulemaking. So that usually implies that there will be public notice and opportunity for public comment. But what I want to point out really specifically is we're talking about Title IV related rules. And because of that, the Higher Education Act has added a layer. another piece of the puzzle for rulemaking called negotiated rulemaking, where we're bringing in key stakeholders to address the goals of the development of the rulemaking and to inform the proposed regulations. So what you'll see here is a multi-step process when we're talking about Title IV rules in terms of the notice, opportunity for comment, and to have negotiator nominations so that those stakeholders can come together for a convening and develop the language that will be the rules. Those will then, we will see the proposed regulations come out available for public comment. Typically, the Title IV rules, the Department of Ed has been doing 30-day public comment periods. And then we know that the department will review those comments to help inform the final regulations. And then there will be a release of the final regulations, and then there will be the effective date. Now, we'll talk a little bit about that here because there's been some more exigency in regard to the development of the effective date relative to the release of the final regulations. So typically, under federal statute from the HEA is something called the master calendar, which is directly tied to federal financial aid, so that by November 1, if the final rules are released, they will become effective the next July 1, giving institutions opportunity to put processes in place. What we will see here is that there has been an uptick in the timeline that the Department of Education has indicated was implied through statute. So that these regulations that we're going to talk about today are going to have a July 2026 effective date. There could be some implementation that's staggered as we see in the regulations. We'll see what that is because one of the sets that we're talking about today has not been released as final yet, and yet we're at June 16. But typically, they're released by November 1, effective the next July, with the opportunity for the secretary to offer early implementation, but that's at the institution's discretion. Why do I bring all this up? Because what you're going to hear today, based on the rules, is how are we going to move forward in this accelerated timeline to be in compliance with rules and implement these regulations. So can we go to the next slide, please? Something that you've heard us talk about many times is collaboration with your financial aid office. And we're going to be talking about management of rules. And so what we have here, and Amanda is putting the NASFA resources into the chat. So please go ahead and grab that link for the NASFA OB3 Web Center because you'll see these workforce Pell and accountability related rules have some resources that you can use. They're open to the public, and we have always indicated that our compliance community ought to really be working with financial aid at their institutions for the management of compliance. So please make good use of those resources. Share them with your financial aid office if they're not aware of them, because they will be helpful. So we're going to move to the next slide, please. So what we're going to start with is on this idea of Pell and workforce Pell. And we're very pleased to have Julie Woodruff, who's going to run through the rules with us. So she is going to give us that overview of the rules. And then we're going to talk about what does implementation look like for states and also for institutions. It'll be an example of, how things could be developing at states and institutions relative to the workforce Pell rules that Julie will describe for us. So I'm going to turn this over to Julie Woodruff. Julie, if you could run us through the rules, please, and then we will talk with some of our other colleagues about implementation. You can go forward. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for having me today. I'm happy to be here on behalf of Thompson Coburn. Next slide, please. Thompson Coburn is a national law firm with over 450 attorneys. We do have a higher education practice group that does nothing but higher education. So we're available for any sort of legal counsel, compliance, or training services that are needed. Next slide, please. This is just my contact information. We can skip that. Next slide. If you have questions, Cheryl knows how to get in touch with me. The QR code here can be very helpful. It will take you to our Regucation, webpage, which has a number of training resources as well as webinars and blogs. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to talk about the AHEAD committee very quickly, then workforce Pell level setting and regulatory considerations. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, Cheryl talked a good bit about negotiated rulemaking. I'll just highlight here that the department has a very nice website dedicated to the negotiated rulemakings. There's a particular page for 2025 where you will find RISE and AHEAD information, and then in 2026 you'll find information related to the AIM negotiations that just completed. Also, once again, we're going to be talking about statutory changes required by OB3, or what is commonly called the Workforce Family Tax Cut Act, I think now is what we're hearing. And then the regulatory considerations along with that. Next slide, please. Okay, just composition of the committee. We had representatives of students, institutions, accreditors, state authorizing agencies and state workforce agencies, as well as employers and taxpayers. One thing you'll note, there was not a direct representative from financial aid, although many of the folks on the committee did have financial aid backgrounds. Next slide, please. And this is, you can just find the names of primary and secondary negotiators for each of those categories. Next slide. And every rulemaking has specific protocols. In this case, because we did have two separate weeks, one involving Pell and loss of Pell and workforce Pell, and then the second week dealing with the accountability framework. The agreement was there would be 2 weeks of negotiations. Week 1 addressing the Pell issues, and then a vote would be taken for consensus. Week 2 accountability. Important to keep in mind is that if consensus is not reached, then the department is able to do as it pleases in the proposed rules. So negotiators really have to struggle with weighing, do we lock in ed and vote for consensus? A thumbs up. I really liked the picture Cheryl had early on, because they actually put a thumbs up or a thumbs down or sideways. So do they want to lock in ed, or do they want to roll the dice and see what they may get in the proposed rule? Next slide. All right, so the issues, 3 primary issues. We're going to focus here on the second bullet, the second sub-bullet, establishment of regulations to manage the distribution of Pell grants to eligible workforce programs. Next slide, please. Okay, you can go to the next one. All right, so here's our week 1 timeline. Final rules published May 19, 2026, with the idea being that workforce eligible programs and will be eligible for Pell beginning July 1 of this year. Next slide, please. So some level setting. It is critically important to understand that Workforce Pell is not an entirely new type of Pell Grant. It is simply an addition to the existing Pell Grant program and extending that program to a shorter class of programs. The importance of this is highlighted by the fact that currently the Pell Grant program is running a deficit, which could increase to approximately $98 billion by FY 2035. There is no permanent fix, and so the money for Pell, including workforce Pell, could get tighter as we go forward if there aren't additional appropriations. Next slide, please. Okay, per statute, Ed is authorized to begin awarding Pell Grants July 1, 2026 to eligible students. An eligible student must meet Pell eligibility requirements, be enrolled in an eligible workforce program, not be enrolled or accepted for enrollment in a program that leads to a graduate credential, and not have obtained a graduate credential. Next slide, please. The terms and conditions for awarding Pell to students are generally the same as for other Title IV eligible programs, except that the programs listed here, such as non-credit courses, are not eligible. And a student may receive a workforce Pell Grant and an amount that is prorated based on the length of the program, notwithstanding that the amount is less than the minimum Pell Grant because the workforce program is less than an academic year. A student may not simultaneously receive workforce Pell Grants and regular Pell Grants, and any period of study covered by a workforce Pell Grant shall be included in determining a student's overall Pell eligibility. Next slide. A program is an eligible workforce program if it is at least 150 clock hours of instruction, but less than 600 clock hours, or the equivalent number of credit hours, and if it is offered by an eligible institution during a minimum of 8 weeks, but less than 15, so 8 to 15 weeks. It is not offered as a correspondence course. However, it can be offered as a distance education course, but do not conflate your SARA membership with approval to offer this program in another state. The two are separate, and we'll talk a little more about that. The governor of the state, after consultation with the state board, must determine that the program meets certain requirements, and then Ed also must determine that the program meets certain requirements. Next slide. The governor has to determine that the education is aligned with the requirements of high skill, high wage, or in-demand industry sectors and occupations, and that it meets the hiring requirements of potential employers and sectors or occupations, and that it either leads to a recognized post-secondary credential that is stackable and portable, or prepares a student for employment in an occupation for which there is only one recognized post-secondary credential, and the program actually provides that credential, and that it prepares students to pursue one or more certificates or degree programs at one or more institutions of higher education. Next slide. The department must subsequently determine that the program has been offered by the institution for not less than 1 year prior to the date on which Ed makes its determination. And for each award year, the program has a verified completion rate of at least 70% and a job placement rate of at least 70%. So you'll sometimes see folks refer to this as the 70-70 requirement. And then for each award year, the total amount of the published tuition and fees of the program for such year is an amount that does not exceed the value-added earnings of students who received federal financial aid and who completed the program 3 years prior to the award year. These earnings are determined by calculating the difference between the median earnings of these students and the 150% of the poverty line applicable to single individuals. Next slide. So now the regulatory considerations. So everything we just discussed was statutory, and these are issues that were subject to consideration by the negotiators. Next slide. Okay, so who is the state board the governor consults? Pretty basic. It's going to be the State Workforce Development Board established under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Next slide. If a program is online, would I have to obtain approval from the governor in every state? Yes. This gets back to where I was mentioning Sarah. So the eligible workforce program offered through distance education would have to obtain approval from every state in which they enroll students to disperse Pell Grants to those students. Remember, Sarah is participation of your institution or membership of your institution. The program approval for purposes of workforce Pell is at the state level and is handled in accordance with the procedure set forth by the governor. This approval then is in addition to any authorization, but the regulation does allow for bilateral agreements. So two governors can get together and create a bilateral agreement, and through that agreement, you might be able to offer your program in more than one state, or it would be approved as a result of that agreement in the two states. Next slide. So you do have to run your eligible workforce program for a year. The governor has to certify that the program currently meets and has met for the 12 months immediately preceding the certification, the core eligibility requirements. However, you would be permitted to seek approval of programs that are already in existence. You do not have to create a brand new program. And then the secretary can waive certain completion and job placement requirements under certain circumstances, such as the governor needs additional time to make those determinations. Next. How is the 70% completion rate measured? So for the first 3 award years, the governor would determine whether the program has a 70% completion rate within 150% of the normal time to completion. After the 28-29 award year, the governor would make this determination in accordance with the regulations 34 CFR 668.8F. A student is excluded from the completion calculation if the student dies, experiences a medical condition preventing employment, is called into uniform service, or is incarcerated. Next slide. So the job placement rate is similar with 3 years. The first 3 years, the governor will make the determination using administrative data and including wage records. And the first 3 years will be based on students who are employed after exiting the program. So that includes your withdrawals or dismissals. Then after 28-29, the calculation would be the percentage based on students who completed and who were employed in occupations for which the program prepares the students, or comparable occupation. The same exclusions apply. Next slide. Okay, if the program fails, it becomes ineligible at the end of the payment period that begins after the date Ed determines that the institution failed to meet a rate requirement. Practically, this means that your student would probably be able to complete their workforce program and not lose eligibility in the middle of the program, but you would not be able to enroll in the future using the workforce Pell. Ed will not make such a determination while an eligibility is pending or there is an appeal. Next. Value-added earnings. Cover this very quickly. I'm running out of time here. So value-added earnings is going to be calculated for the first time during the 2030-2031 award year, but it is essentially taking the median earnings of the students in the cohort period, less 150% of the poverty line for an individual. So your eligible workforce programs' total published tuition and fees may not exceed those value-added earnings. Next slide. No later than 3 months prior to the beginning of an award year, Ed would publish the value-added earnings cap that would apply to the eligible workforce programs for the upcoming award year. The institution must keep its published tuition and fees at or below the value-added earnings cap for all students who first enroll in the program during the award year. Programs that have a calculated value-added earnings of 0 or a negative value shall not be eligible for the federal Pell Grant funds. Next. To regain eligibility, it's going to depend on why you lost eligibility. If the governor pulled your certification or you exceeded the value earnings cap, then you would have to either regain your certification or reduce your tuition and fees so that you're under the cap. However, if the loss is due to failing the job completion, the job placement or completion rates, there's a 2-year waiting period, which also applies to substantially similar eligible workforce programs in the same 4-digit zip code with an identical SOC code. Next slide. All right, one more. Let's go. Okay, so there's the QR code if you want to visit Regucation. And then also I have to just give my disclosure. This is for informational purposes and it's not legal advice. So there, I'll turn it back to Cheryl.
That was great, Julie. Thank you very much. We appreciate you running through the rules. Yes, I can't say enough about, we included the link in the chat. Actually, Amanda, if you could put the Regucation back in the chat again for those that came in later. You will find copies of similar slides in that location as well. So I do urge you, their resources are top notch. Their webinars are very informative. So thank you, Julie. Really appreciate you running through this like this for us. So what I'm really excited to share with you is about how states are implementing. And this is something that some states are moving forward more quickly than others. Some are waiting to see what are some best practices, and some of them are, seizing the day and moving forward. And so we're really fortunate to have a good colleague, Lynette Kuhn, who's going to be able to share with us what the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is doing to seize the day and move forward with this opportunity in Pennsylvania. So I'm going to turn this to Lynette, please, if let's see, Amanda, if you could go ahead to Lynette's first slide, that would be really helpful. So Lynette, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Cheryl. And Julie, thank you. I think that's a great segue to take some of the regulatory language and show how it could be implemented. Sometimes it's hard to grasp when you don't see the actual tangible implementation of what those words are saying. So thank you so much for setting us up for that. Really excited here in PA for the implementation of this program. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Pennsylvania, we have a very dysregulated, decentralized system of higher education. We do not have a data system yet. Check back with me in October of this year, and I'll have some different narrative around that. But so we were really nervous when we looked at, everything Julie just reviewed and went over to say, how are we going to get this data? Because we are so decentralized here in Pennsylvania. And thankfully, we had some great OAIT colleagues, which is just in our Office of Administration, and really great participation from our institutions who were willing to work with us to gather this data and be able to collect what was needed for Workforce Pell. So Pennsylvania looked at the regulations, and at the time they were the proposed regulations, and we wanted to make sure that we were taking a very strategic and risk-adverse strategy as we implemented Workforce Pell. So while we started with a whole universe of occupations, which led to looking at over 800 plus occupations in the Commonwealth, we really narrowed down that list to 19 occupations. We looked at the health sectors, we looked at the technology sectors, those that we hear a lot, those in the trades, electricians, carpentry, and had metrics that we looked at on the universal list, such as how many job openings were there, what was projected over the next 10 years, entry-level wages, so on and so forth. And for the details of that, I just put our website in the chat that you can go on and look at the actual process that we utilized to determine which occupations we were going to look at. And again, we wanted to say risk adverse. We didn't know at that time what the final rule was going to equate to. And we didn't want to put institutions and most importantly, students in a position where they don't know if they're eligible for funding. Do they have to pay the funding back if the feds determine them ineligible once it reached that part? So we wanted to make sure that we were looking at all of those areas, and that's why we focused on these 19 occupations. Those 19 occupations are also listed on the website that I put in the chat, so you can view and just kind of see how we approach that. So on February 27th, we presented them to our Pennsylvania State Workforce Development Board. And again, we've been collaborating with them since August of last year to make sure that we weren't missing anything. And I can say for anybody who is starting this process or maybe just bringing workforce and education together, we speak completely different languages. There is different vocabulary that we use in one sector compared to another. And it's really important that you take the time to flush out those details. So when I say program, I mean an academic program. When somebody from one of my workforce colleagues says program, it might be something like WIOA or a program offered at CareerLink or something that's on the ETPL list. There's many different definitions that float out there for the same word. So really make sure that you're fleshing out those definitions. Doing that, we were able to get our 19 occupations endorsed by the State Workforce Development Board in late February. And right after that, we launched data collection. We opened up data collection on March 9th. That also concluded on April 17th. So we had a good 6-week window. We hosted trainings every Wednesday. We had office hours every Wednesday to allow the institutions to come in to ask questions. As you heard in Julie's presentation, there are many different considerations that institutions have to flush out for this program. So what do we mean by the second quarter after completion? What does it mean, just the term placement? What data has to be collected? So we wanted to make sure that we were there for our institutions to ask those questions. And there could be things that we have missed in just the interpretation. So we had some great conversations back and forth to help flush out some items. From that, we had 40 programs from 11 institutions that were submitted. So a low number, but actually a lot more than I thought would have been submitted at the time. And again, I preface that Pennsylvania does not have a data system. So knowing that our institutions had all of this data for the ones that did submit was actually really astounding. We have in Pennsylvania what's known as our private licensed schools, and these are our non-degree granting institutions who offer certificate and diploma programs. Most of these institutions are accredited by what's known as the formerly national accreditors, excuse me. And I really feel like the former national accreditors have set up the institutions that they accredit for these non-credit programming because they always required outcomes reporting. So these institutions were able to look at their outcomes, know what programs tentatively met the metrics that Julie described, the 70-70, and were able to have that data collected more successfully than we saw in our degree granting institutions here in Pennsylvania. Our community colleges, as degree granting institutions, they were able to submit, but we did not really see a lot of our four-year institutions, even though they have some great non-credit programming for workforce development. They just didn't have the data needed, such as Social Security numbers. So with that, we had 2 programs that met the full requirements, and that's 2 throughout the Commonwealth. So we've been hearing nationwide that there are going to be low programs, or people are estimating low program approvals, just because we, 1, proposed regulations, we didn't know what it was going to look like in the final form. 2, working together across the different areas, and I'm sure some of you can relate on the call, where you have your non-credit side that does not speak to your degree credit side or your academic credit side to the institution. So really breaking down those silos and having those tough conversations to access what is needed. And then just internally flushing out the details of how you can work together to submit this data in the best way possible for your students. Just recently on May 19th, the State Workforce Development Board endorsed 2 programs. I will say that they are both CDL programs. So we also talk about, when Workforce Pell, what it was intended to be versus what it is at this time are 2 different discussions. And also talking to your students at institutions about which form of funding, once you're approved for Workforce Pell, is actually the most beneficial for the student. It's important to keep in mind that Workforce Pell is, as Julie mentioned, is not a new a new program, I should say, sorry. Pell is not a new program. Short-term credentials are now eligible for Pell, and that's what these regulations are supporting. However, that goes to the student's lifetime maximum eligibility. And you want to make sure that your students are aware of that. So while it could be prorated for the amount of hours that a program is, depending on what the student's career pathway or educational pathway is that they want to achieve, financial aid officers and directors really need to have clear communication and spell out the implications of utilizing Workforce Pell for these short-term credentials to see what is going to be the most beneficial and make the most sense for them as they go through their pathway. Some things talking about an implementation, we did connect right to our labor and industry wage data records to verify placement. That was something that did not exist in Pennsylvania prior to this program as far as the connection. So we were able to, have an MOU put in place to collect the data. But we're getting into social security numbers. And I feel like when you say social security numbers and higher ed in the same sentence, everybody's radar goes up and red flags. And, we're all kind of traumatized from the 2008, 2012 era where we had to get rid of all those social security numbers. And it's a taboo word in higher ed. Well, we're back to needing them. I was speaking to the panelists prior to starting the call. I was just learning about some of the institutions who have systems that aren't able to support the entry of student social security numbers just because of the way that they're set up, or be able to connect to the degree side of the student information system to actually administer the financial aid because of some of these regulations, rules, policies that have guided higher ed throughout the years. So just some things have taken place. And right now, those two programs are awaiting governor approval. And you can go to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about why some of those programs were not approved. So I apologize for the small font, but most of the programs exceeded the program length requirements. So those 8 to less than 15 weeks, or the 150 hours to 599 hours. You have to take also into consideration the full-time and part-time offering of a program. So we actually had institutions that their full-time offerings were eligible, but their part-time offerings were not, because in the final rule, this is an and. So the weeks and hours, or the credit conversion and equivalency, it's an and. It's not an or. Where in traditional Pell, you can have a part-time program that goes as many weeks as it needs to based off the hours. In a workforce Pell program, it has to align to those 8 to less than 15 weeks, and then the hour or credit equivalency that's listed in the regs. So many did not meet the eligibility requirements because of that. Some just lacked the documentation for stackability and transferability. We learned here in PA that while you may have, especially with the CDL program, just as an example, you may have a sole credential. So you cannot become a CDL driver without a CDL license. There is no other way to become a CDL driver without that. So you do have that sole recognized piece of it. But that doesn't negate the fact that the program still has to be stackable and transferable. You still have to assign academic credit to that hour program and make sure that you have the conversion and what is a student's next step should they decide to continue on in that educational journey. Where will those credits transfer into? What are some options to them? I had a great conversation with an institution last week that you have a nurse aid program, and they equated credits, 3 credits, to a health science elective for a student who wanted to go into an LPN program. And they only listed the 3 credits to a health science elective. That doesn't show, in Pennsylvania's opinion, true stackability and transferability, because what is that health science elective good for? What program will that actually be considered for acceptance into? So as talking back and forth and having these conversations, you do want to show that educational pathway and the courses that will align to the program completion as they go through additional educational programming, or moving on for some educational growth. The program was a direct assessment program. So we did have some that not only did contract with a third party, which there's certain rules around that in the final rule, but also this was a asynchronous course. Students, signed on, did the coursework, took the tests at their leisure, and there was no synchronous learning or an instructor assigned with live courses or anything like that. Other areas, just quickly, we had missing student data to be able to connect to the wage record system, didn't meet the employment or the placement of 70%. Some just didn't submit student data, which we obviously couldn't look at moving forward. And then you can see the other ones listed there. The one that I do want to point out is pre-apprenticeship programs. In Pennsylvania, we had a hard time being able to justify through the evidence submitted that a pre-apprenticeship program would actually lead to entry-level employment and being able to connect to the registered apprenticeship when there wasn't a guarantee of the student being admitted into that registered apprenticeship. So some of the conversation around the apprenticeships that's happening is the apprenticeship considered employment? Is it considered entry-level employment? And then again, what credential is being produced at the end of that pre-apprenticeship program that they can take into a standalone profession or employment opportunity? So we did deny based off that and the lack of evidence submitted. Next slide, please. So while we're waiting for our governor's approval, we are already planning for next year and identifying occupations. And we're going to be going on kind of a regional roadshow here in Pennsylvania, where we're going to be hosting 5 regional meetings. So we are combining, we have 10 what we call prep regions. We'll combine 2 each. That we're going to invite industry partners, employers, and higher ed institutions to discuss some of the questions we have around apprenticeship training, to discuss what ways we can innovate between industry and higher education. How can we separate some of the programs that were put together specifically to qualify for traditional Pell, and some grant opportunities that we can possibly separate those programs out to individualized program to meet that 1-year requirement to be eligible for workforce Pell, and then to make sure that we are meeting the in-demand, high-skill, high-need occupations for the region. So we will have more than 19 next year, but they'll be aligned to the actual region itself. And that is everything for Pennsylvania. Happy to answer any questions at the end that you may have.
Thank you so much, Lynette. This was so helpful to see how a state has visualized a plan to address this. So I think this is very informative for institutions to know how states may come about this as they're looking at their programs and what might need to be key information and collaboration that needs to occur. So thank you, Lynette. This is very helpful. For us to determine direction, which leads us to our next bit. We're really pleased to have Cynthia Proctor here to be able to share what are they doing, for purposes of New York, what is the system doing for SUNY to prepare? And so Cynthia has some direction for us about how an institution system is preparing. So we go to the next slide, please, to start for Cynthia. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Cheryl, and thank you, Julie, for that really fantastic overview. And Lynette, congratulations to you and your team for doing such a thoughtful job on implementation. It's just really remarkable. I'll say up front that I am enamored with Workforce Pell. Whether or not we end up having a lot of students that become eligible or credentials that become eligible, it has brought to light some long-standing challenges around data collection, around silos between credit and non-credit, around financial aid for non-traditional programs, that for whatever reason, it gained standing. Like all of a sudden it was like, you know what? Today is the day we're going to look at these issues. And so our development process has been one where we absolutely want to prepare, as many Workforce Pell eligible credentials as we can, and to try to support more New Yorkers, leveraging some existing state aid that we have as well. But we're also really using this as an opportunity to fine-tune our data collection and reporting systems, the ways in which we map both degree and career pathways for students. And so I'm excited by the conversations and the dialogue that this program has brought forward. So SUNY, for those of you who aren't familiar, is the largest public higher education system in the country. In New York, we have 64 campuses statewide. In addition to SUNY, for New York City, there is a city university system, or CUNY. And so between the two of us, we provide extended public higher education opportunities for New Yorkers. And we have worked in collaboration in preparing for Workforce Pell. We're also working with Kiku, who is an organization of the private higher ed institutions in New York State. We initially set up 3 sort of functional groups, one dealing with programs and process, one dealing with data, one dealing with really communication, right? We knew that communication, both internal and external, was going to be really important to this work to ensure that internally we knew how to operate this program, and externally that students and families understood the potential of Workforce Pell and its limitations as well. So we've had 3 groups working for really probably well over a year now, and we did make a few important first steps. We pulled from SUNY's existing catalog of micro-credentials. So SUNY has over 500 credit-bearing micro-credentials that are taught by faculty that are stackable to degree programs, from which we knew that there would be a good fit, a good alignment with micro-credential program. We also have tens of thousands of non-credit offerings where we're really just in the process of mapping a new non-credit student information system to fully track the data on that across those programs. And so we said, okay, well, we have micro-credentials, we have non-credit, we're building that data system. How do we reach out to campuses and talk to them about what they think, what programs they think might be eligible? And you can go to the next slide. So we did a call for programs, and we actually received over 300 programs that campuses thought might be eligible. And there was some wishful thinking on their part. I'm not going to lie. All of the programs were not necessarily in what we would traditionally consider high demand areas, but it was good to sort of get the flow of information going. And we also decided at SUNY that we wanted to take the lead with our other higher education partners in performing, in creating a process for our governor to consider about how we could support the governor in administering this program. And so we really took the initiative to put pen to paper and start to flesh out ideas, and then met with the governor's team and really came to agreement on a set of criteria that I think reflects really, sort of higher education's sort of function and purpose, meets the letter of the regulation. But it was really important for us, I think, to have the seat at the table. And I think the ultimate regulations are strong because of that. So if you're still at a point where your state hasn't committed yet to regulations, I encourage you to work to get a seat at the table, because that was really important for us. In terms of industries, we started by looking at what we already had in place. So our WIOA plan, our Perkins plan, already have some industries identified. We've defined this process, really looking at, who was going to approve, what documentation was going to be required. Lynette, you've certainly provided some great examples there. I think we've had a number of questions about how we demonstrate, employer support. How do we verify that employers are supportive of the credentials? How do we have campuses attest that the credentials are stackable and portable? And so we've thought through some forms. We've also, thought through what happens if campuses are not compliant, and thought about what the revocation process looks like. Talk about student notification and teach out. We've talked a lot about how we monitor student persistence and completion, right? We don't want to wait until the end of the year to see that a particular credential or program is in trouble. If there are some additional supports or interventions we can implement. And so We're talking about some more real-time monitoring of student persistence, which I think is important. We've also been talking with our financial aid directors who, candidly are incredibly busy right now. I would dare say overwhelmed is not an understatement, trying to manage all of the changes with higher ed and federal lending generally, right? And so in those cases, most institutions have sort of automated processes for awarding financial aid. But when it comes to these alternative programs with distinct criteria, we've found that our campuses are resorting to sort of manual processes. We have a state tuition assistance program for which micro-credential students are eligible. And it is very hard on our campuses because it's a manual process for them, right? And so we've been really working with them and saying, okay, we realize that we need to support you, provide some automation here, figure out how we can modify systems to manage both Workforce Pell and our state program, frankly, right? Let's leverage this to create new processes that will be beneficial. So we've been working with our financial aid directors. And then as we have narrowed down that initial list of 300, right, we've started looking at the data. So SUNY has had in place for some time, probably almost 10 years now, an MOU with the New York State Department of Labor where we can track the wage data. So that's a plus. For some of our credentials, our micro credentials, for example, we were already collecting social date of birth. On the broader non-credit continuing education programs, we have not been. So we talked about building processes where we could collect that information and establishing a connection between the campus and a central repository for that data. So we're trying to source through now which of the credentials that sort of meet the industry requirements do we have sufficient data to make the determinations about completion and about job placement. And so it's been a challenging process, but again, I've been wishing that we would have these conversations, right, for a number of years as the person who led micro credentials, right? And so it's later than I'd hoped, but I'm so glad that we're having these conversations now. And I honestly think that it is going to improve our data integration, our transparency to students and families, and also our alignment of student success initiatives with these programs, which I think too often have been treated as siloed programs, right? So I'm excited about that. We still have a heck of a lot more work to do. We're waiting for final approval from our governor on the policies and procedures. Once that gets set, then we'll sort of officially open up our application. We're hoping that comes very soon. But we know that we still have some continued work to do around data collection. And then we're also trying to figure out, and Julie, I know that you will be a good guide for us as we go forward. What is the timeline going to be once we submit programs to the secretary? And how can we sort of map out the steps that will be needed there for approval as well so that we're ready for them? So again, I would say we've accomplished a lot, but have more to do. But I'm not losing hope because I do think that this whole process is, if we really take this process seriously, it's going to benefit us in so many different ways. Cheryl?
That was great, Cynthia. I think one of the things that I really took away was how it is a collaborative effort. So not only from Lynette, but also from Cynthia, that it takes many voices to collaborate to come to a process, and we're still waiting on what that process will be after states make determinations and institutions apply, states make decisions, and then how the department's timeline is going to be on that as well. So, this is an ongoing process. We're looking forward to seeing, what this looks like in a flow, how it becomes normalized. So I really appreciate, how you've shared the vision in Pennsylvania and the vision at the SUNY system, which is very strong examples, for our members to review. So we can take questions at this point, but I'm not seeing them in here. So here's my suggestion. I think we should move ahead to, no pun intended, to back to Julie to talk about accountability measures. And I would like you all to think about your questions, because I will tell you that at the very end, if we do not get to everyone's questions, not to worry, we will bank the questions and we will get responses, and we will return to you by email with the link to the video and to responses to questions. So hold tight on that. Don't worry about questions. We will get to them, but we're going to move ahead to accountability measures and back to Julie. So Julie?
Great. Let's see. Amanda, if you want to go to my first slide. Okay, and let's go ahead and go a few so we can get to the meat of this. Keep going. Let's see, we can keep going a little more. One more. All right, so just with regard to the timeline, Cheryl did touch on this. We do not have final rules. Unlike Workforce Pell, we do not have final rules. Consensus was reached. The comment period ended May 20th, so we're still waiting for those final rules to see what is actually published. We do know that the department wants to begin publishing or calculating the earnings premiums July 1, 2027. They'll get the data for that on October 1st of this year. There is currently on the books an obligation for institutions to provide certain data that the department will use, but hopefully these will be published well before then, and so we'll know what to expect, but just be on the lookout for those. Next slide. Okay, with regard to the overview, first thing, you can go to the next slide, that's fine. So first of all, we're eliminating through these rules the debt to earnings rates that maybe all of us have heard of over the years with regard to financial value transparency and gainful employment. Gainful employment is not going away. That term is in statute, but the department is looking to harmonize. That word appears over and over again in the transcripts, that harmonizing one test, an earnings premium test for all Title IV programs. Next slide. Okay, they've eliminated some exemptions. We'll continue on next. Let's see. Now, both GE and non-GE programs will still be identified by a combination of the institution's OPEID number, the program's 6-digit zip code, and the program's credential level. Next slide. Okay, this is an important slide, maybe the most important one of any of them, any I have in here. So each year, Ed would calculate an earnings premium for each Title IV program using the formula as you see here. Pretty simple. Earnings premium equals median annual earnings less the earnings threshold. We're going to talk about both sides of the equation here. So you pass the earnings premium test if the median annual earnings equal or exceed the earnings threshold. Next slide. Okay, next slide, we'll talk about this later. So if 50% or more of the institution's Title IV recipients are in, or 50% or more of an institution's Title IV funds are from low-earning programs, there is a new administrative capability standard that the institution would fail. And the consequence of that is the program would then not only lose access to direct loans, but would also lose eligibility for Pell if they fail that standard for 2 out of any 3 consecutive award years. Next slide. Next slide. We'll keep going. Just trying to conserve some time here. Okay, the earnings premium test. So there are 2 tests, and it's based on the credential level. So for a baccalaureate or lesser credential, the median annual earnings are those of working completers who graduated about 3 to 4 years before the determination year, less the earnings threshold, which is based on the median annual earnings of working adults aged 25 to 34 who have only a high school diploma. So baccalaureate or lesser credential is compared with high school diploma or equivalent. Next slide. For a graduate and professional degree, once again, you're looking at those median annual earnings of completers 3 to 4 years prior to determination versus the median annual earnings of working adults aged 25 to 34 who have only a baccalaureate degree. Next slide. All right, median annual earnings in general, working completers. So for all Title IV programs, the median annual earnings would be based on the median earnings for working completers, which are students who completed during the applicable cohort period, receive some Title IV aid and are working, and do not otherwise fall into an excluded category. Next slide. Here are the exclusions. You can take a look at the draft CFR 668.403 if you would like to learn more about this. Next slide. All right, our initial cohort period. Ed proposes to begin by only looking at the earnings of students who completed during a single award year. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I think that's the diagram might be a little bit easier. So we know the department is wanting to calculate the first set of numbers in July 1, by July 1, 2027. So the first year of earnings that it would have for July 1, 2027 calculation is going to be 2025. And then you go back 4 years to the 2021 award year. So the earnings test for July 1, 2027 is calculated using completers from the 2021 award year. That can get a little confusing and it may take a little time to get used to. Next slide. Okay, so Ed has to have 30 completers in order to calculate the earnings premium. So Ed has created a mechanism whereby the initial single cohort year, if it has fewer than 30 completers, Ed is going to begin expanding that period 1 year at a time until it reaches 30 completer threshold. Remember, we're at the 6-digit zip code here. The agency would include up to 4 additional award years in this expansion. If it still does not have 30 completers, it's going to go to the 4-digit zip code and bring in more completers into the mix. And it's going to begin at that single cohort. So in the example, we use 2020, 2021, and it's going to expand 1 year at a time through the 8th prior award year. Then if they still do not have 30 completers, they will go down to the 2-digit zip code and go through the same process, hopefully getting 30 completers by then. If not, no premium will be calculated. Next slide. Earnings year and data. For students who completed the program during the cohort year, Ed would always use the earnings for the 4th tax year following when they completed the program. This ensures a consistent interval. And once again, remember, these are proposed rules. We've not yet seen the final rule. I really have to emphasize that. So a consistent interval between program completion and earnings measurements. The department contemplates using the IRS as the federal agency with this earnings data. Next slide. Earnings and working. So the proposed rules do provide a definition of earnings, which you see there, wages, income as reported to the IRS and other earned income included self-employment, but it does not define working. And in part, that's because they want to look to align the treatment of the term working with the treatment of working by the Census Bureau that will be providing that data to the department. Next slide. Ed will not calculate earnings premiums, as we said, if they do not have that 30 student cohort after going through that entire process of back going back and forward and back and forward. And they will also not calculate it if the earnings data is not provided on, it's only provided on 15 or fewer students by the outside agencies. Next slide. All right, the earnings threshold, right? So this is your median annual earnings less the earnings threshold produces your earnings premium. So the earnings threshold for undergraduate and non-degree programs is aged for earnings for students aged 25 through 34, or I apologize, not students, earnings for adults aged 25 through 34 with only a high school diploma or recognized equivalent who worked and who were not enrolled in a Title IV eligible institution during the earnings year. Next slide. For undergraduate and non-degree programs, Ed would use the median earnings for working adults at the state level in which the institution is located, or nationally if fewer than 50% of students enrolled in the institution during the award year are from the state where the institution is located. So there's a state or national distinction depending on where the students are located. Next slide. Now turning to the graduate degree programs, Title IV institution, for Title IV institution located in a state would be based on the median earnings for adults aged 25 to 34 with only a baccalaureate degree who worked and who were not enrolled in a Title IV institution during the earning year. Next slide. Now this gets a lot more complicated trying to figure out, are we going to look at a national, a local, state? So I won't go into a lot of detail here. I'll just mention that for graduate degree programs, once again, the determination is based on this 50% threshold. Are the students located in the state where the institution is located or outside? In this instance, though, the department has also thrown in the aspect of looking at the 2-digit zip or 4-digit zip code if data is available, or if it is, and if it is statistically reliable. Next slide. Earnings data for working adults. The department is gonna be looking at the Census Bureau, and that's gonna be the American Community Survey. Next slide. Consequences of failure. Each year upon finalizing the earnings premium for each program, Ed would issue a notice of determination to the institution informing it of the earnings premium for each Title IV program, as well as whether the program is passing or failing and the consequences of that determination. Consequences are student warnings and loss of direct loan eligibility. So if you fail 1 year, you are going to have to provide warnings to your students that next year, because if you fail 2 consecutive years, you lose eligibility for direct loans. So 1 failure is going to result in warnings, 2 failures, loss of direct loans. And then in that third bullet, we're talking again about the administrative capability measure that could cause you to lose access to Pell Grants as well. Next slide. A little more about student warnings here. There is information in the proposed rule about what exactly goes into those warnings, how it is circulated to students, and it does apply to your current and prospective students for purposes of ineligibility for the next award year. Next slide. All right, voluntary program closure. This was an idea that came about sort of later in the week, but it does allow for institutions following a first failure, and provided Ed agrees, for an institution to sign a PPA amendment permitting it to voluntarily teach out the program. So among other requirements, the institution would have to immediately cease new enrollments, and the decision is not reversible. However, it would permit your institution to continue receiving direct loans for the lesser of 3 years or the full-time normal duration of the program. Following the end of the teach out, the program would be subject to the period of ineligibility before regaining eligibility. Next slide. So what is the period? Well, if you have a failing program that is discontinued voluntarily, either before or after the earnings premium measure becomes effective, or a program that is ineligible under the earnings premiums measure, you have 2 years following the earlier date the program loses eligibility or the date the institution voluntarily discontinued the failing program. Next slide. Scope of ineligibility. During the 2-year period, an institution may not seek to establish direct loan eligibility for a program sharing the same 4-digit zip code and any overlapping SOC codes as the program that is ineligible. However, the institution may seek to establish eligibility for a program with the same zip code at a different credential level. Next slide. There is a very limited appeal. Basically, the only assertion you can make is that Ed erred in its calculation of the program's earning premium measure under the applicable regulation. Next slide. Institutional action plans. Next slide. All right, so here is where you really need to get everyone together. This is not a one-shop process. Everybody needs to be included in the conversations, your leadership, your council, academics, and develop a compliance plan for this rule. Determine which programs, if any, may fail the new test. There's actually a data set on the department's webpage called the PPD 2026 that estimates those programs that will pass and those that will fail. Do note, if you take a look at this, it's not based on the same zip code levels, so it may or may not apply, but it's a good gauge to kind of get an idea where your institution is going and what programs may be at risk. Integrate earnings analysis into your program development process as you go forward. Next slide. And with that, I'm finished. You all know about Regulation. You know this is informational and not legal advice. So Cheryl, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Julie. These rules that Julie has gone through today for us are very nuanced, very dense. This is why I was also encouraging you all to communicate with your financial aid offices. They will be doing a lion's share, especially of the the accountability measures, but with your assistance probably from the academic standpoint. So it is important that you know how this works so that you can be informative to your financial aid offices. But the resources on the NASFA page, I can't express enough how important they'll be. So we're very fortunate to have Carolyn Fast with us here today as well to talk to us about institutional impact. So if you go to the next slide, please, Amanda, and we'll turn it over to Carolyn to tell us about, what should institutions be doing to be prepared for this.
Well, thanks so much. And thanks, Julie, for that really excellent description of the rule. That was so helpful and really useful. Thank you so much. I will just talk a little bit about what institutions might want to be thinking about in the lead up to the enactment of the rule. So next slide, please. As was mentioned, it's a good idea for institutions to be thinking about how their programs are going to fare and figuring out which programs might be clearly failing or near the threshold, because those programs are things that you're going to need to be thinking about making decisions about. Next slide, please. So if you think that a program is likely to fail the earnings metric, as Julie explained, that means that that program could risk losing direct loan eligibility, but that would be if it failed the metric for 2 out of 3 consecutive years. And so that there might be some questions that an institution might have to assess what steps should be taken if there are programs that are likely to fail. And that might be to determine how many students in the program rely on direct loans, for what amount, and what kinds of potential issues could be if there was a loss of direct loans. If there's a program that's being offered that is relatively inexpensive and students are able to pay for it using a Pell Grant, for example, then that might be less of a concern. And then also the institutions may want to think about other their potential interventions for programs that might be close to the threshold. This seems like it might be a long shot for a short-term kind of an improvement, but there is a question is there something that could be done to improve earnings outcomes? Seems unlikely in the time frame that you have. Should you make decisions about offering the course, thinking about maybe not offering the course, or if you want to continue to offer the course but you think it's going to fail, there's some consideration about whether there could be an adjustment to tuition to make it possible for students to participate without borrowing. Because of course, in addition to the sort of practical considerations of how this is going to affect enrollment, there is a concern about does the institution want to continue to offer programs that aren't providing good earnings outcomes for students? But separately from that, if there is a decision that the institution does want to consider that, then it might want to consider whether it's possible to make it possible for students to participate without borrowing. Next slide, please. Then separately, some institutions may need to consider whether there is a risk that more than 50% of programs that are being offered by the institution are at risk of failing, or similarly, more than half of Title IV recipients enrolled are enrolled in failing programs. This would only really affect institutions that, in general, this would affect institutions that offer one type of program. So for example, a cosmetology school might have a concern about this, because if this is a concern, that will have wider impact on the institution, because those programs would risk losing access to both direct loan eligibility and Pell grants for those failing programs, and the entire institution would be at risk of being put into provisional certification status for Title IV. So that could be a concern for some institutions, but probably won't be a concern for the vast majority of institutions. Next slide, please. So just other concerns or thoughts that institutions should be thinking about in the lead up to the rule are whether they need to make any changes related to reporting requirements. Generally, the answer is no, because the reporting requirements to the department for this upcoming year look very similar to what was already in place with the gainful employment financial value transparency regs that are in place until the new regs go into effect, and the department is not planning to make changes. The department's proposed rule would actually make reporting requirements somewhat less onerous over time, starting in the 2027 reporting year. There are some changes in the proposed rule that would eliminate some of the data that is currently required under the regulation. So that's a good thing for institutions in terms of burden. Institutions should also think about what processes they need to put in place to provide disclosures to students who may be in programs that are at risk of failing. This would not happen right away because there's going to be a lead-in period, as Julie explained, before this all happens, but schools should be thinking about putting in place any processes they need to make sure that that's happening. And schools might just want to be aware that, as Julie mentioned, there is an appeals process, but it is extremely limited. So those are just some sort of high-level things that schools should be thinking about, and hopefully that is useful, and happy to answer questions.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. That was so important. I appreciate, so Julie laid out, the very nuanced rules, and Carolyn really helped us, kind of identify what that means for our institutions in terms of what's next for us as we wait, unfortunately, at this point for final rules that we do not have at this point, but at least gives us some ideas of what we should be starting to talk about our institutions to prepare. So we do have some time for some questions. So I'd like to turn this to Catherine, please, if you could share the questions. And I think the ones we have thus far seem to particularly be for the last half of this presentation. So for Carolyn and Julie.
Yes. We'll start with the first question that we have, which is what happens to programs that don't have enough students in the cohort to determine the earnings?
Carolyn, you want to
I'm happy
go
to,
with
or you
that?
can jump in
Yeah.
whichever you want. Do you
Oh,
want
go
me to?
ahead. Go ahead.
Sure.
Sure.
Okay. Well, it's a little bit complicated, and I'm sure Julie can explain better than I can. But if there are fewer than 30 students in a cohort, then in a nutshell, the proposed rules indicate that the cohort that of students that would be considered would expand by going back at first 1 year, and then if that is not sufficient to bring the number of students above 30 a second year, and so on, for a period going back a number of years. And then if I think it's, I don't know, to the something like going from the fourth prior cohort to the eighth prior year for the award year, which is a little confusing. I liked Julie's slide showing the different years that was actually super helpful. So thank you for that. So they would go back, I think, 4 years, and then if that's still not enough, it would expand the SIP code as to make it more broad. So instead of looking very narrowly at the type of program, it would look at related programs, and it would continue to do this until it had more than 30 students. Julie, please correct me if that's totally wrong.
No, that is not wrong. It ultimately, if they don't get to 30 students, they're not going to calculate it. But with all of the back and forth, I suspect there'll be few programs that do not actually have 30 students and expanding the cohort. Just lost an earbud. So expanding between 6, 4, and 2, and then going back and forth in time, that may may ultimately yield 30 students. And I was going to say, I noticed, Ricky, you put in the chat the link to the PPD 26. Anybody who's going to download that, first of all, thank you very much. I couldn't find it as quickly as you did. But anybody who is going to download that, it is a very large file. So maybe make sure you have sufficient resources on your computer to give that a chance to download before you start doing it.
Thank you for that, and thank you for sharing. And Julie's will also probably be for you or Carolyn or both of you. But the next question is, what do you make of Ed basing all calculations at the six-digit CIP level instead of the program level? Seems to conflict with OB3 language, and worth noting that there may be multiple programs offered under the same six-digit CIP with the cohorts now conflated. Do you know why they did this?
I do not have a good answer for that. No, I mean, we can come back. I can give Cheryl some thoughts on that later, but off the top of my head, I don't have a great answer for that.
Looks like Ricky's coming on. Ricky, did you want to follow up with that question?
Oh, I did not realize I was coming on. Sorry, I was just trying to add to the chat. But yeah, I just added it to the chat as well. It's something I did participate in a comment submission on to ask for clarification, so hopefully we get it. But I realized, when the negreg sessions were taking place, they just defaulted right to that rather than say a program is a program. And I'm not sure if they did not realize that institutions may have multiple six-digit SIP programs at the same credential level. Maybe it's the same program offered in different modality types. Maybe it's two closely connected programs. They both get the same six-digit SIP treatment. And yeah, it's a real head scratcher because that is not what it says in OB3. It says the program. It doesn't say a six-digit SIP combo with these OPE and credential level scenarios. That's kind of a way to get at close proximity through the data of what a program looks like, but it's not necessarily an individual program. So yeah, we'll see what comes of that, but maybe they'll change it. I didn't know if anybody had any insights as to why that choice was made.
It is very interesting that it's taken this long to get the final rules out, to be quite honest with you. The other ones have tended to come a little bit more quickly. There were, what, 8,000-ish comments for this public comment period. Evidently, a colleague shared with me at a MEC meeting last week that the undersecretary indicated that we would see these rules by July 1. So release on July 1, which just is another head scratcher in terms of, well, what does that mean for an effective and implementation structure? So I'm sure that all of that will be in the preamble. And so we'll learn that shortly, but it is taking some time on this one. We probably have time for another question or two. Does anybody have any questions related to the accountability measures or for the workforce Pell related regulations as well as far as implementation? I mean, we really have been fortunate to see a state that has been so thoughtful and an institution system that has been so thoughtful in their preparation. Well, if there are no more questions, Amanda, could you put the slide deck back up to the resources, please? Okay, so just to share a little bit about WCET and SAN resources, there's the policy tracker. We hope that you will find that useful to get you some information about the various different policy issues related that have some sort of relation to digital learning. It's very focused to that. The point is to offer the guidance, the executive order, statutes, regulations, I said executive orders, guidance. So different policy elements that you may want to review. Plus, of course, WCET Frontiers. We did a resource on Workforce Pell. And I want to advertise the upcoming webinar on July 15, where we will talk about all the things coming into play for July. So the last thing to share, can we go to the next slide, please? And there we go, the NASFA Resources Reprise. Just wanted to share again that your financial aid folks are likely members of NASFA, which is an organization supporting their work much in the same way that we are working as a community as well. And so they have specific checklists and change opportunities regarding the workforce Pell rules and the accountability rules. So I strongly urge you to have a look at their resources to help support your work and to be informed for the conversations that you're having at your institution. We go to the next slide, please. And just a final thank you for all of you to attend. I'm super grateful to Julie Woodruff, Lynette Kuhn, Cynthia Proctor, and for Carolyn Fass being with us today. And their expertise is second to none. It was so helpful to have them here. So grateful to you all. And if you do have any further questions after you've had a chance to try to process, please do not hesitate to reach out to a member of the SAN team. We have our emails listed here. You will see after we've had a chance to go back and do the appropriate remediation to the videos that we will get those out by email as well as, so the videos. And if there are further questions, we will consider that in a document as well. Okay, so I lied. There's one more question that someone snuck in. I just want to ask, if time, what is the likelihood that the accountability rules will not come to fruition? Anybody want to grab that one?
I'll just say I don't think I think it is likely they will come to fruition. I mean, much of it is in statute.
Yep.
So that's there. And the department has July 1, 2027 as a date to calculate these things. So I think we're going to see it. There might be some tweaking, but we're going to see it.
So, Julie, I'm really glad that you said that. And so we will leave. This is a great segue as we start looking into things later in the week. This is coming from statute, from recent statute that they have to move forward with. So much of it was in statute, which in contrast to when we were looking at the distance education and state authorization rules. The state authorization rulemaking, remember, that was terminated because they could, because those were not directed from statute to implement those rules. Those were amending regulations that were already in existence, which is similar to what we're going to be talking about on Thursday, when we talk about the accreditation related, because they're amending accreditation regulations as opposed to creating something that came immediately from statute. So these OB3 rules are special. They're getting this accelerated process time, and so much of it is in statute that there was not as much flexibility for the department as they were developing these rules. So thanks for nailing that, Julie. So please do. I was just going to have some final comments.
Just one quick nuance there. So what I said is accurate for the non-GE programs. The GE program, gainful employment programs, the term gainful employment is in statute in the Higher Education Act prior to OB3. The regulatory structure for accountability of GE programs is in regulation. Through the AHEAD accountability rulemaking, the department harmonized those so that it's one test for all Title IV programs. So just that little caveat.
Super distinction, Julie. Thank you so much. So thank you, everyone. Again, if other questions come up that you would like us to address, you can send them to us by email. But thank you all for being here today, and thank you to our wonderful presenters. Hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.